Hello, and welcome back. Today I'd like to talk about progression materials in Arknights Endfield. Like Arknights, Endfield also has a stamina system, where the amount of materials you can farm is tied to a daily regenerating currency, called stamina. However, unlike Arknights, Endfield also has an open world with gatherable materials that refresh daily. This means that while some materials can have their value calculated in sanity, others are strictly time limited. I figured it would be interesting to do some of the basic math to get an idea of what dailies will look like, how much progression material you can expect to earn, and what general strategies might be optimal. First off, though, I'd like to briefly express some thoughts about the progression systems in general. I think there's too many materials by far. The number of categories and rarities is definitely too overwhelming on first contact, and I think it adds very little depth. In particular, I don't agree, but I do understand the argument for 4 rarity tiers of upgrade materials, given that there are 4 promotion levels. However, there is absolutely no need for there to be 3 functionally identical combat scripts, 3 functionally identical sources of weapon XP, and 2 functionally identical protologs. I think even beyond progression, this game has a real problem with overwhelming the player with a massive amount of materials that aren't really all that different. But, gripes aside, let's go over all of the dailies in the game. Keep in mind that everything in this video is based on the beta test. As a result, it's all subject to change. Any conclusions that I might come to could easily change if Hypergriff decides to make minor adjustments to any of these systems. The first and most obvious daily income is sanity. 1 sanity regenerates every 7 minutes and 12 seconds, resulting in a daily sanity income of 200. Currently, the maximum sanity limit at the maximum level in the beta test is 360, which allows a minimum login frequency of once every 1 day, 19 hours, and 12 minutes. So clearly you'll just be logging in once every day. Sanity is spent exclusively on rifts. For now, there's just basic material farming rifts, which give credits, XP, or level up materials in exchange for sanity. I'll talk a bit more about the sanity value of materials later, but for now suffice it to say that the most efficient rifts generally cost 80 sanity, meaning you'll have to farm 2.5 daily on average to avoid capping out your sanity. The next daily task is the Eco Farm. It's relatively simple. There's 1 area in the Originium Science Park and 1 in Jinlong, where you can plant 2 tiers of crops. Common plants, like buckflower or jincow, take several hours from planting to harvest, while the rarer ones, like tart pepper or ginseng, take about 12 hours. In theory, planting and harvesting crops like this allows you to obtain materials in bulk that otherwise can only be collected from the open world manually. However, I don't think it's really worth it. The only use of these materials is to craft special consumables, and the consumables in this game are generally pretty generic. The special ones, even the ones that you can craft with these rare materials, still don't really justify their existence over the ones that you can very easily mass produce in the AIC. As a result, I don't really think these farms will be relevant in the endgame, especially once you've maxed out your crafting manual, which I think is the only real purpose of these farms. Next up are the gatherables scattered around the open world. There are 3 categories: skill upgrade materials, promotion materials, and weapon tuning materials. Within each category, there are multiple rarities, with higher rarities being used for higher level upgrades. Each map has a number of rare gathering sites that spawn a handful of 1 material every day. The daily income is dependent on the world level, and it also varies between locations, but there is always a cap of 10 gatherables per site. It's worth noting that there are a handful of sites that provide 3 materials per gatherable. Those locations essentially have a cap of 30. I've accounted for this difference in the information that I'll present later in this video. With that in mind, here's a quick rundown of everything that was available in the beta test. In the process of recording these clips, I of course visited every gathering site on the map. Doing so took me approximately half an hour. It's worth noting that I've placed ziplines to speed up some of the more valuable materials, whereas for others, especially the lower rarity materials, I never bothered to place ziplines, so I had to traverse the map the slow way. Whatever the optimal gathering strategy ends up actually being, it will obviously be ideal to place ziplines along that route. That being said, I think 20 minutes is a reasonable estimate if you're going to be gathering all of the materials on the map. Personally, I think 20 minutes is a bit too much for a tedious task that is done daily, which is why it's lucky that this won't be a daily task. For one thing, a large majority of the gathering sites can be visited every other day or every 3rd day without losing any efficiency. More importantly, however, the material income that they all provide in aggregate far outstrips any demand for upgrade materials that is likely to exist in the endgame. More concretely, the rarest materials still provide enough daily income to max out an operator every day. If you let the materials cap out and stop generating, The amount that is stored up is still enough to upgrade 2.5 operators, so unless they release 2 new characters every 3 days, you can just not collect anything until new operators release, and then collect everything once and have enough for all of them. So you don't have to collect these every day, not even close. The daily income will really only be relevant in the early game, when you're trying to build as many operators as you can, but once you're in the endgame, you'll basically only collect these materials once each time new operators are released. Finally, we have Dijang. There are production facilities aboard Dijang that will be familiar to anyone that's played Arknights: the growth chamber and the manufacturing cabin. Manufacturing cabins are basically factories. They produce experience that is normally farmed with sanity. The growth chamber, conversely, produces time-limited gatherable materials. Of course, compared to the amount that the map generates, the growth chamber is pretty slow. However, I think it will probably still be able to provide enough materials for an endgame player all on its own. Of course, it depends entirely on the update schedule, but I don't foresee there being enough demand to make optimizing the growth chamber a necessity. The manufacturing cabin is a little more interesting. It only produces experience, although there's 2 types. Combat scripts and protologs are both worth experience towards promoting operators. The former, which I'll call XP1 from here on, is used for levels 1 through 60, while the latter, which I'll call XP2, is only used for levels 60 through 80. You may be surprised to learn that according to my math, producing XP1 via Combat Script 3 is dramatically more efficient than producing XP2 via Protolog 2. Not only is the demand for XP1 much higher, XP1 is also worth more sanity than XP2, and is faster to produce. On that note, I might as well share the calculations I did for the sanity values of other materials. XP is the most interesting case, since the value affects how the manufacturing cabin should operate. As for the rest, it's really only useful to know the ratio of the demand for each material to help you farm more evenly. Here's a quick table with some potentially useful values. If you're interested in more detailed calculations, I'll link the whole spreadsheet in the description. One big takeaway from all this is that credits and protohedrons are extremely high demand materials. In fact, there is a notable absence of credits income in Endfield. No trading post, and the outpost trading doesn't provide credits like it did in the alpha. Instead, it provides certificates that can be used to buy from a store. However, the credits in that store have a maximum stock, which puts a cap on the amount of credits you can earn this way every week. In light of that, it's fairly interesting how skewed the demand is nonetheless. So, in conclusion, the gatherable progression materials are not really scarce at all. Endgame players will probably not need to collect them from the map very often, if at all. The sanity materials, on the other hand, definitely need to be farmed daily. Compared to Arknights though, calculating their value is very straightforward, since, for now at least, there are no efficient rifts with a large variety of material drops like there are in Arknights. I don't really love the overwhelming variety of materials, but I guess it's par for the course for a gacha game. Anyway, I hope you found the information here helpful, or at least interesting. Thank you for watching.